Hello everyone, and welcome to Chennai International Centre's first virtual interactive session. We are delighted that Sridhar Vembu, founder of Zoho Corporation, is here with us today to address our audience. And on behalf of the trustees and board of Chennai International Centre, I'm delighted to welcome you, Sridhar. Thank you for being here. Thank you for addressing our audience and for facilitating this virtual session through Zoho.
So I'm so happy to be here, Vanita. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Pleasure, and we are delighted. Thanks, Sridhar. But before handing over the virtual stage to you, let me just take some time to kind of brief the flow of the session to the audience,
Okay.
And just warm up before you can start off. To the audience, I mean, this session is structured very similar to our physical events, where you get to interact with the speaker. In this case, Sridhar Vembu will, present his lecture for 45-50 minutes and then open up for Q&A. Now, for the Q&A, you will find you can either request for mic access. You'll see a mic icon on the left-hand side of your screen, or you can type in your questions, which will directly go to Sridhar. But this is after the lecture. Now, during the session, you can also use the chat option over there. It works pretty similar to your social media live streaming. So you can feel free to chat and it will be public. Everybody can view what you're typing. So that's the chat. But for your questions, please use the mic or the question icon on your left after Sridhar finishes. Now we are just trying to work around with new ways of engagement given this, strange situation and challenging times. So we request you to kindly bear with us as we adapt and, work out these modalities. And also if there are any technical glitches. Let me now transfer back to Sridhar. Sridhar, over to you. I'm just transferring the control.
First of all, I want to thank all of you and Namaste, Malay Vanakkam in Tamil. So I will, this is an interesting way to speak, and even I'm getting used to it, even though we actually have built the tools. I'm not that used to it yet, to all this. So let me first start by saying that as a commentary on the current situation, one thing that as a business, what I am planning right now, let me put it that way. So I cannot predict the future, but I can tell you what I'm planning. What I am planning right now is that this is not a temporary disruption due to a virus alone. There is a global reset event, I'm going to call it, that is happening right now. And what I mean by that is that we have had a lot of trends in the world, like we had trade wars and we had friction, Brexit, all of these. And to me, the virus just simply added another dimension on top of trends that were already on. And what was the trend? And this trend, actually, I would say, if you go back to the 2008-9 global financial crisis, I would kind of date the beginning of this changes to that era. That's 12 years ago. That it's not something that is started happening just last year or 2 years ago, but for 12 years that these trends have started. And then we saw the Greek crisis, Brexit, Trump's election in the US, which is a kind of a populist revolt, if you will, and trade wars, friction, all of this. And in that whole context is how I would place the virus. That it's not simply just something that happened independent of all of this. This virus is a continuation of all those trends. And as a result, that it has kind of accelerated what anyway was coming. That is my view. Meaning that it's not like this virus completely changed the course, but it just simply accelerated the course the world was, I believe, already on. And that is what my own business planning for our business really looks like. That these are trends that I've been aware, and I've been saying this internally. And I've been saying this outside too. And so let's look at what those trends are, particularly from a an Indian perspective. And those of you who have heard me speak or followed me on Twitter know some of these. That I have said, for example, India has built an economy, particularly in the last 20, 25 years, where we have come to rely extensively on imports, particularly of complex high-value goods. And we are paying for it by combination of remittance economy, that is labor exports, and of course, external commercial borrowings, and what we call the FII, foreign investment, which is basically selling bits and pieces of the country abroad. So these are the mechanisms by which India has actually bridged the persistent trade deficits and current account deficits for a long period now. I mean, we are talking 20, 25, 30 years now going on. And at this point, I would call it a structural, it has become almost a structural feature of our economy. And this virus exposed it well, where suddenly we need ventilators, we need masks, we need a certain category of medical goods, and of course, pharmaceuticals, a lot of that. And suddenly we find ourselves, oh, a lot of this supply chain is in China, and they're having their own problems. And we don't know whether we can get access to those goods, which is the same problem that Europe and US, everyone is finding themselves in this situation, along with India. And that is what, partly what a lot of the trade wars, trade friction was about this exactly. In fact, I've been following this fascinating thing in the US where you are seeing a country shift away from globalization steadily. And this is not just a Trump administration thing. I'm actually seeing it both on the right and the left. In fact, there are Republican senators now who are thoughtful critics of globalization, and similarly, Bernie Sanders on the left, very similar thing. Of course, they will never say that they agree with each other, but they do actually on many of these things, they tend to agree with each other. So that is where it is heading. So you can get a glimpse of the politics even in a post-Trump era, where globalization will probably not be led by America anymore. In fact, it may get led by China, but which is a different matter, but at least America is not going to exercise the leadership. The Washington consensus is dead now. And we have been on that all along. Our economic policy has been driven by that Washington consensus of trade liberalization and opening ourselves to imports, all of these. And this is where I actually am a thoughtful critic of this process. I would argue that this what it has led to, in our country at least, is simply almost an inability to build advanced capabilities among ourselves. And this is not just the opening of trade, but a variety of institutional, structural, all of these together have ensured that we don't actually even aim to build capabilities. And in field after field, it's true. India has been a leader in pharmaceuticals, but our APIs, what they call the active pharmacological ingredients, actually 80% of them come from China. So we are assembling the chemicals into drug molecules, and we seem to specialize in all the FDA approvals, all the processes in order to get a drug to market, rather than on the chemistry, the biochemistry, all of that underneath, which we are happy to outsource to China. And in fact, we have, I'm very familiar with some of the startups doing electric vehicles, all of that. They tell me a lot of the critical components they have to import. They are not actually, there are no domestic suppliers capable of building those, including some of the electrical motors and all of that. And you would think India has been building motors for a long, long time. And yet we actually have to import the critical motors and the controllers, all of that we need for the electric vehicles. That even so the startup is here, they still have to source a lot of the parts from abroad, critical parts. And this is true in semiconductors. And of course, our smartphone is a classic example of this, where almost none of the technically advanced parts we know how to make in India. Even though we today assemble those phones, but that's maybe on even a $200 phone, it's at best a 5%, 10% of the value added. Most of the value added is abroad right now. And similarly, in textile machines, the advanced know-how, the state-of-the-art machines are imported. In fact, one of my friends who is in the tech in agricultural technology, he tells me sometimes rice polishing machines are imported from Switzerland. That think about rice polishing, and we are actually importing machines from Switzerland for rice polishing in India. So that is our state of today in India. And now put this together with what I mentioned about the Washington Consensus and globalization. To me, we are rapidly moving towards a situation where this is not tenable. This is not workable anymore. And it's also, of course, not workable from the perspective of the deficits and the foreign debt that we are getting into, and the rupee crisis. The reason for the rupee fall is that we desperately need dollars. And we need those dollars because a lot of Indian corporations, Indian entities have dollar-denominated debt. In many cases, in fact, most cases, the dollar-denominated debt has nothing to do with the business requirement, because these are not actually, externally trading entities, but purely as a financial transaction. Many entities have found it easier to borrow in dollar-denominated debt because of interest rate differential and all of that. And now suddenly there's a situation where when that whole thing goes against you, because when the rupee depreciates, the dollar debt becomes expensive. So that is our situation today. But as I say, every crisis is an opportunity. And I have been actually thinking the last several years that these kind of matters are going to come to a head. How do we plan to a future where it will change? Because as they say in economics, if something cannot go on forever, it will stop. And that is, so I knew that it will end. It's perhaps this virus is going to actually accelerate the transformation. And so the question is, what are the opportunities ahead when this type of model, the Washington Consensus model, ends? It reaches its logical culmination. What kind of what does the landscape look like? And how do we, as business people and entrepreneurs and in the industry, how do we take advantage of those opportunities? That is what I'm going to discuss today. And first thing that I will say in this, and in fact, one of the things that I wanted to mention in this, the socio-economic fabric of India, where we actually have to, whatever actions we take as business people, we have to keep in mind unique characteristics of our country. And this is one thing where I actually fundamentally believe that economics cannot be separated from sociology and our family structures, all of this. And of course, this is something that I owe this particular insight to my mentor and advisor, Mr. Gurumurthy, who is actually a deep thinker, who has actually influenced me in many of these ideas. I do want to thank him because he actually has been a key influence on this. I've been thinking along these lines, but when I started reading his work and listening to his speeches, it kind of, a lot of things came together, clicked for me. So I actually want to definitely acknowledge that that a lot of these, I've had the benefit of discussions with him on this. And so whatever actions we take, it has to be consistent with our own, the social economic fabric of our country. And what do I mean by that? And let me put it this way. Ours is a society where we have actually fundamentally have had a lot of self-reliance at a family, at a village, community, and regional levels. That we are not a country where the reliance is, everything is placed on the state. And there is a lot of those civil structures, institutions that are actually powerful. And that is where a lot of our reliance has been put. We are not an atomized society where every individual has a direct connection to the state alone and dependency on the state. Instead, we are actually have, I call it molecular clusters. That's my own term. The family unit, the communities, and of course, along with it, all the institutions, the companies, regional groupings, state level groups, all of these play a vital role in our overall fabric. That it's not just a man as an individual and the state, those two entities. There is a lot of those intermediate things, which is where a lot of our dependence is on those units rather than directly with the large state. And that's important to understand, because at our size, as 1.3 billion people, it is impossible and it's extremely unwise for all decisions to be made in Delhi. It has to be made at family and village and regional, all these levels. And Delhi should not be in every decision. That's a very critical insight, that and that's the only way that India will have a sustainable development long term. And so we have to make our decisions, our investments, all of that in keeping with this. And for me, that is where I was led to invest in smaller towns and villages. In fact, right now I'm speaking to you from a small village in actually remote near the Western Ghats. Right behind me here is the Western Ghats. Actually, I'm at the very edge of the state. And if I, as the crow flies, maybe about 8 kilometers is Kerala from here, where I'm sitting right now. And it's a very beautiful spot near Tenkasi. And it's actually, these are places that we have, in terms of the economic participation, these have been mainly places where people live. They go to cities or they go abroad. There's a lot of, in this region, there's a lot of people who are migrants to the Middle East or Singapore or of course, US, all of these, and of course, Chennai and Bangalore. So there's a lot of migrants. But the local economic activity is, agriculture and derived stuff, but there's not a lot here. And yet, it's a very beautiful place. And there is actually, today the roads are very good. The local education system is actually increasingly better and better. There's a lot of talent to tap here. And that's what, about 10 years ago, I decided we will open an office here. And when we decided that, at that time, it was purely based on, this is not actually my hometown. My hometown is near Kumbakonam. This was based on just the sheer beauty of the place. That was really what led us to do this. There wasn't really any serious criteria here. I wanted a small town, about 1 lakh people, and physically beautiful. And that's, I fall for that. So that is how we started this in Tenkasi. And our operation now has about 500 people. We actually do fairly leading edge R&D here, including we have a group that works on AI-based tools here in Tenkasi, artificial intelligence, and we have actually some really strong groups that build sophisticated software frameworks right here. And all of the talent is actually, almost the entire talent comes from within about a 50-100 kilometer radius from surrounding colleges or our own Zoho University program. We have about 1/5 of our employees here came from our own Zoho University program. So we have invested heavily, and we have 4 or 5 full-time faculty members here who actually train them very rigorously for about a year, and they join the team, and then the training continues, and then they become full-time employees. So that is how we have built it here. And that's what enabled me to move myself here, actually. I'm mostly, about 70-80% of my time is spent here in this rural home. And I commute to work nearby when there is, when I could, but now, I'm quarantined like everybody else. But for all, if I have to be locked in, this is an absolutely beautiful place to be locked in from. It almost feels like cheating that, I'm locked in here. So that is where we are. And it has last several months I've been here, particularly in this village. I've been observing the local social economics, not at the town level like Tenkasi, but even in the more distant villages, which is about 25-27 kilometers from Tenkasi itself. And I've been observing what is the pattern of economic activity here, all of this. I came to the conclusion that there is a lot more can be done here, even at this village level. And that this is now the time to invest here. The connecting roads are good. It's actually easy to transport goods outside now. And the broadband is quite good. You can see that I'm actually able to conduct this type of thing from here. I'm on a geo connection right now. This is the lifeline here. So this geo modem, and I'm able to do this. And that is what is amazing about this today. And this was not even true 5 years ago. All of this geo stuff wasn't possible 5 years ago, but now today it has changed dramatically. And I've been having meetings. In fact, tomorrow I have an Australian interview with a journalist, and I'm doing it right from here. And I actually spoke to CNBC Mumbai's channel live from here, actually, right from here. So a lot of this is not possible even 5 years ago. And yet now it's possible. So at this point, I'm actually actively, in fact, this virus interrupted this plan. We would have actually set up a 10-20% small office right in this form, and a small design center to work personally with me and some of the products that I personally have an input on. So that was the plan that we have been on. And I'm going to actually make it, we have actually built a rural center near Kumbakonam, which is actually my native village, about 20 kilometers south of, 20 kilometers north of Kumbakonam, I should say, and where we have built an office where we are also going to do similar thing that I'm planning here. And I'll probably be commuting between Kumbakonam and Tenkasi. There's a convenient train that goes between here. So that is how I'm planning. And all of these, all state-of-the-art work. This is work which San Francisco people are doing, or in London or in Netherlands. It's very similar work we can do, actually. That is what is shocking about the world today, that I can sit here, I can do state-of-the-art work. Our engineers can do really interesting work. In this very house, this farmhouse, we have had discussions about some new technologies that we've been working on, and with all the video, all this. So it is actually very possible to do this now. And that is what has changed. And this dovetails the point I made about a lot of these advanced know-how has to be created in India. So you talk about, and here are the sectors that I am thinking of that we should actually aggressively invest in as business people. And we ourselves are, for example, doing in semiconductors, semiconductor design right now. Someday, within 5 years or 10 years, I hope that we get to a stage where we are able to build fabs in India. It's absolutely needed because we are importing every last semiconductor we use from abroad right now, which is, again, not tenable in the next 10 years. We have to build fabs. Similarly, we have to build all the medical equipment, and we have to build advanced know-how for automobiles and transport technologies, intelligent transport, and you name it. I mean, and of course, biotech, all of the biotech. And in fact, I follow Ms. Kiran Mazumdar-Shah on Twitter, and she's one of the rare pioneers in India in biotech. And she would say how much more needs to be done in India in this field. That essentially all of the innovations are happening abroad, and we need to do that here because we need those medicines, vital medicines here. And that is, again, another field where R&D is needed. And this type of R&D can be located in small towns and rural areas. We don't have to push all of them in Chennai or in Bangalore or even Coimbatore or Madurai. Actually, we can send it to the next tier. And the beautiful thing here is the high quality talent you need, the R&D talent, actually can be attracted to places like this. That we can set up a 50%, 100% design center in places like this, because today the quality of life is very good, and the connectivity is good, and the schools are good, and there is a hospital, within about 15, 20, 25 minutes, I can reach actually a fairly decent hospital. And about an hour, Tirunelveli is about an hour, and I get, really good hospitals there. And then there is other side, Kerala, which has a lot of medical facilities as well. So a lot of districts are in that situation in India where actually we can do a lot more in small towns and rural areas. Within an hour or two, we can reach bigger centers. And so the quality of life you get and the cost of living is super low. We are talking about land prices in these areas, maybe 10, 20 lakhs per acre. And correspondingly in Chennai, it will be, they're talking 100 times or more than this. So those are and that has dramatic implications on how long your R&D project can be sustained, and you are what they call the runway for this. And that was one of the reasons I picked Tenkasi, is that I wanted to invest in really long-term R&D that could have uncertain payback for long periods. And this, for example, this very product, short time you are on, we've been working on the precursors to this technology for over 10 years now. And only now are these actually reaching the market and we are spreading it. And so it has taken about 10 years of, we have shipped other products along the way in this, but this particular thing has taken about 10 years of R&D, getting all this video, audio, all that right. It has taken a long time, and the mobile part, all of this. And we have been able to invest in all this R&D because of our our approach to where we are doing it. That we are doing it in Tenkasi and places like that. And that is really vital for any of these mission critical R&D projects that have to be sustained for a long period of time. That you actually have the runway you give yourself for these 50 or 100 people to work on some critical projects. And then you have product groups, design groups that take these ideas and convert them into products for markets. And increasingly, those markets should be thought of as first India first. That our first market is India itself, and then only we look at export. I still believe in global trade, all of that, but much more balanced global trade, where we are able to match our imports and exports. And this is actually where I'm developing a thesis. I consider three fundamental aspects of economic thing. First is, of course, balance. Balance means that our inputs and outputs should match. Absolutely. That when we buy $1 worth of goods, we should be able to sell $1 worth of goods. That is a balance. And that's long-term trade has to balance. Otherwise, we are going into debt to pay for it. And symmetry. This is actually an interesting one where we have to be able to sell similarly complex goods for the complexity of goods we buy. This is a subtle one, because if, for example, Saudi Arabia ships oil and buys everything else, well, they have enough oil so they can do this, except when oil prices crash by 50 or 60%. Suddenly, what used to be in balance now is no longer in balance, and they have a crisis. So if you don't have symmetry or the complexity of goods matching, you will lose balance at one point or another. If the particular kind of things you do lose value, your lack of symmetry will prevent you from moving to similar areas, and so you lose balance. So symmetry is a long-term balance requirement. Balance is a more short-term, medium-term, and symmetry is a long-term requirement. And then the third thing is harmony, where I say that internally your things have to balance. That means that various groups, various things inside even a territory, a district or a state, all of that have to be in balance with respect to each other. So balance is not just externally, but internally we have to have some kind of a rough balance. And so these are the three things: symmetry, balance, symmetry, and harmony are fundamental, I believe, to a sustainable economic foundation. And as business people, we can actually take advantage of these principles in how we invest. And the way that we are investing in Zoho, I'm looking for complex R&D activities where we specialize in complex engineering projects. That I am an engineer. In fact, I still work in engineering, complicated engineering problems. And I want to actually work closely with engineers to solve complex problems and then offer solutions and productize them. That is how we think about business. And these actually are totally fundamentally different from the way you think about projects, because the payoff for these projects is uncertain. I can tell you there have been projects where we have had 100-to-1 payoff, like what VCs would say. Of course, there have been a lot of duds too, where we actually launch a product, we don't make money for a while. And it's sort of, in a way, I joke that this is like making movies in many ways, that you have very uncertain payoffs. But India specializes in making movies. So we actually know this principle that some things pay off and some things don't pay off well. And there's not a predictable deterministic payoff. And that is very critical. So these R&D projects are really like making movies, except that here you're making the same movie, third version, fourth version, again and again, as you refine the R&D concepts. So that is actually how I think of product groups, where you have a director, you have a music director, all of them, but they are working on a long-term basis on the same thing and refinement of ideas. And this is how the Japanese and the Germans and the Koreans and the Taiwanese and of course the Chinese have all thought about it. And to some extent, we have actually borrowed a lot of our concepts from the Anglo-Saxon, at first the UK and then the US world, where a lot of these, US had an R&D culture, but increasingly it has lost it in this whole financial rush. And Silicon Valley has added a new twist where your first thing, it launches fast, the minimum viable product, but there's not a sustaining R&D investment. Very few companies do that, that long-term R&D investment. I mean, Microsoft and Apple are good counterexamples, but Many companies don't do this. And on the other hand, if you look at a BMW or you look at a Toyota, you look at a Samsung, they have been actually nurturing these R&D projects for a long time, which is why they are able to come up with world-beating products again and again and again. That is what we have to learn from India, that whole approach. And I actually believe that particularly in South, and particularly in Tamil Nadu and Deep South, all these places, there is a lot of the talent willing to work on these projects for long periods, wanting to do these. And I am blessed with a really good, motivated workforce in Tenkasi crew, which people who are very motivated by the problems that we are working on. And we have been at it for 10 years here now. And within Zoho Corp now, a lot of the products have now 15, 20 years of R&D behind them. And we are in the third or fourth generation of R&D in a lot of our products. That is what I would want as part of the Make in India initiative here. Not just Make in India, but design in India, do the R&D, figure out solutions to complex problems. And what do those problems look like? For example, we actually don't have a really good DC motor capability, which is critical for everything from robotics to medical devices to, of course, electric cars. Everywhere at the heart are these motors. And we actually need variety of shapes and forms and power factors, all of that with characteristics. And we are not actually very good at this at all, this whole model. Biotech is similar. And of course, I mentioned semiconductors. And we actually are, you think of ourselves as good at software, but so much of software is still important. In spite of having a large software engineering base here, we actually don't build enough products. So, and of course, Zoho, we have been working on this problem for a while, but we still have, and given that all the products have a critical software component now, that product-based software capability is very vital for us. And so every business and actually even your electrical motor R&D increasingly looks like a software project with a lab attached, maybe a prototyping unit attached. But a lot of what people are doing is exactly like software engineers, playing with this CAD concepts, all of that in the computer. And then eventually you make prototypes and you test, and then you refine, test, and come up with new designs, test. So that is the cycle. And then you analyze the data. A lot of the activity looks exactly like software. And it can be done in a small village level. I mean, I'm going deeper into village level. I'm not just talking about towns. In fact, our own 500-seat development center is not actually in Tenkasi. It's about 10 kilometers outside in a small village on the main road. And now I'm actually distributing it further into these interior villages where I'm planning to put 10, 20 people here for the quality of life and the experience of living like this. This has striking implications for our rural economics. I did an analysis where I take a village like where I am right now, about population about 2,000 people at the panchayat level, and as few as maybe 10 or 20 high-paying jobs. And high-paying jobs, I mean maybe 1 to 2 lakh per month kind of jobs in the Indian context, could dramatically alter the what I call the trade balance of the village, or the terms of trade of the village. Suddenly this village has actually high velocity money coming in, and when that money is spent locally, it has high multiplier effect. Suddenly the local GDP, the village GDP, if you will, can go up 2, 3 times, 4 times in seemingly overnight. Believe it or not, the 500 people we have put in Tenkasi area, already I would say we have had the regional GDP is vastly higher. In fact, I meet random auto drivers here who tell me our income has doubled after you moved in. And the reason was very simple. They had a lot of slack. A lot of the auto drivers in these areas, they sit around idle for custom. They don't actually get enough people giving them business. And after we moved in, we have not added that many people. Still, their incomes are doubled because they just get a lot more business right now. And even though they still have some slack, but they just get much more business than they used to get. And so the multiplier effect on local GDP is enormous. And finally, there is another reason why I did all of that. I believe one of the bane of our industry has been just how much of our investment goes to pay the real estate gods, as I call it. That we get caught in expensive real estate areas, and just the land value itself and the imputed rent or the mortgage or the capital investment required, all of that itself becomes a serious barrier to entry, or serious your project cost gets magnified by that real estate barrier. And that is actually something that I've thought about for 25 years. In fact, ever since when I started with nothing here in this business, right? I calculated, one of my first insight is that if I set myself up in an expensive real estate area, most of the capital I build is going to feed the real estate monster. That the existing, all I'm doing is I'm simply enabling the existing real estate investors to get a handsome return. So somebody get 100 or 1,000-fold return on their real estate investment, and that's all I am doing as a businessman to enable that return. So that was my first insight 25 years ago. I do the math, I calculate, and I realized that all I'm doing is, and this is something venture capitalists in San Francisco came to the same conclusion. They said, we put money in a startup, most of the money is going into real estate, either directly by the company or by the employees paying for expensive real estate and rent and mortgage, whatnot. So this is something that one of the leading VCs talked about recently. This is something I realized early on, that feeding a real estate monster is a bad idea for any businessman. So you have to find really low cost land, and that is where you should set your investments. In the Indian context, practically every place in India has people around. You take a random pin on the map in India and you draw a circle of 20, 30 kilometer radius for a district, you're going to find at least 1 million, maybe 2 million people easily. Even the sparsest populated area, you might have 1 million people, and otherwise you may have 2, 3, 4 million people. So there is no dearth of people, and we can actually find the raw talent. And if we, again, the other thing that I have always told myself as a businessman is that the talent problem is something that's the first problem I solve in any project. If I need chemical engineers, I'll figure out how to make chemical engineers, not just depend on chemical engineers from the market. And that, of course, requires a little extra time. So I always say that I start at year -5 or -4 rather than year 0. So that 3 or 4 or 5 years is the time I need to figure out all of these, how to get the talent, how to set up a facility in a small location. It's going to be cheap, but it's going to get time. So what I don't pay in real estate costs, I give myself the time, extra runway, those 4 or 5 years. That mode of thinking has really paid off well for us. That pattern of thought where I think of -5, year -5, you get started in this project. Then when I reach the 0th year, I'm not actually feeling like a failure. Actually, I've reached year 0 from -5, all this. So we now have the talent, we have the resources, now we can really do something now. So that is how I think about these problems. And with this, we actually are able to do a lot more. Our activities are expanding in a variety of dimensions now. As I mentioned, we are actually investing heavily in AI right here in Tenkasi. And a lot of these video, a lot of these tools are also actually getting actively built now. We are even building, I myself am involved in projects to build new class of programming languages, new class of frameworks, all of that from right here. So it is all possible to do it. That is the first thing that I want you to believe. You have to believe me that it's possible to do it from here. And I would encourage some of you at least to think different and see how you can move yourself to one of these smaller towns. Make a move. And it's actually possible. This is something, one of those things where the initial, your mental friction doing this, once you do it, you'll realize that it's actually, your lifestyle, your everything gets actually better. So that is, and then once you're being there, really helps your project succeed much better. So these are the things that I want to share with you. I want to give you a positive, optimistic thing of where the world is heading. And this virus will end. But I don't believe that we are going to go back to the world before the virus, because that world already was due to end. The Washington consensus, the globalization model that we had adopted, where countries like India pay for everything with debt, will end. And it is going to end. And we have to build those domestic capabilities. This is also aligned with our government's vision, the Make in India program, But I would say that I would give a twist that you have to do it out of rural areas. We have to do the design, R&D, high value jobs we have to create. And 1 or 2% of high value jobs in a village context as a benefit to the whole village. That is actually something I've observed on the ground, this affects. So, and even we actually in Zoho, we end up employing people who have no education at all, often didn't go to school at all, effectively illiterate, because all those, lot of the helper, all those jobs are needed. And these people get actually a stable income because we exist. And they tell me, they come and tell me that without this company, there is no way I could have had the life I have now. And this is possible because we actually create those high value jobs. And I also often thank our engineers. I point to that and say, every one of you who has a high value job here, because of you, there are 5 other jobs here. So thank you for staying here. I tell them, thank you for staying here because of you, there are 5 other people who actually have a living wage because of you. So that is why I think it's vital that we invest in these areas. It is personally very satisfying. It is spiritually very satisfying. And of course, it's very rewarding. I mean, we build a lot of capital and people talk about, Zoho has become this big and net worth, all of that. I don't pay attention to it. But in a sense, these are also leading to material success, really. But the spiritual satisfaction is immense from doing this. So with that, I'm going to actually take questions. I hope you all had something out of this Saturday evening. So feel free to post your questions there. Thank you.
There's a question there by Ramki.
Yeah,
yeah.
Hope everyone can see the question. So holistic change in the academic framework and greater collaboration between industry and academia. This is actually a very important one. I'm going to be even more radical and say, at this point, I actually no longer believe in much of the conventional education paradigm itself. I'm pretty radical, of course. So you don't have to believe in this, but I'm just sharing with you what I believe now. And the reason for that is I actually look at it on the ground. I look at people here. My own purpose of education is that you have to create a self-reliant, responsible citizen. Self-reliance is very important, actually. And think about all those exams he wrote in, when did Babur invade India, or what are the minerals found in Australia and all of that. And most of us don't remember any of that. I don't think most of us randomly can answer which year Babur invaded India, as an example. In fact, I often take a random person in Zoho and ask, who came first? Quick. Was it Emperor Ashoka or Emperor Akbar? And I would say that 70% will say, I don't remember. I don't know. Shocking, right? Ashoka and Akbar. 70% will say they don't know. So that is, I don't blame the education system, by the way. This is true anywhere in the world. This is actually true in Japan. This is true in Korea. This is true in US. This is true in China. The reason is that all this kind of education does not really create a lasting thing in people. On the other hand, real practical skills, in the time that we were learning about Babur and Akbar, if we had learned how to actually fix plumbing, fix motorbikes, and fix our stove, a lot of those, fix toilets, all of those practical skills would give us a lot of self-reliance. And to me, entrepreneurship comes out of that self-reliance. Really, entrepreneurship is an extension of that self-reliance to something broader. That our personal self-reliance, we are expanding into broader notion of self-reliance. That is how entrepreneurship comes. So I would focus on education differently. And this again, actually, we are planning to create such schooling initiatives here in the rural areas as well. Whereas anyway, the kids here are actually not motivated by the current schooling. So we are going to try something different. And so this actually then goes to your point, see the entrepreneurial spirit. To me, that comes directly from that self-reliance spirit. That this attitude, I can fix it. I can do something about this problem. That attitude is what ultimately leads to entrepreneurship. So I hope that I have addressed those points here.
There's another question by Anant Krishnan.
It's in terms of moving high-end jobs to smaller towns, it's easier for IT. Actually, this is what I actually mentioned in my talk, that even you take a design of an electrical motor or experimenting with biotech, you definitely need some machines, but the amount of infrastructure required is fairly minimal. I mean, it's not huge. I mean, you need electricity, which is actually pretty good, and we can have a solar plant and maybe a diesel generator backup, all of that. It's not that seriously expensive considering the land is so cheap. So both solar and diesel, as a backups could be good, and we now have a decent electricity situation now in our country. And so in terms of that infrastructure, you need, of course, and the fundamental reason is that all of these jobs are becoming digital jobs, design jobs. Designing an electrical motor now a lot of the work is done on the computer. And designing, on biotech medicine, there is of course labs involved, but there's also a lot of computation involved. So that infrastructure can be done rural. And of course, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can have actually a hub in Chennai, and people come and go every month, once or twice. But most of the work is done in their hometown, in the village. So it's actually, I believe it's possible. So the key is the very high-end job itself is not a shop floor job, which is separate manufacturing job, but it's really a design job. Therefore, it's a digital job. Yeah, I have a question that I'll project here. Sridhar Vembu. How do you maintain resources? Yeah, this is actually a good one. And in fact, observationally, our attrition rate in Tenkasi is among the lowest anywhere. And we probably lose fewer than 1.5% a year. So it means if we have 500 people, we would lose maybe 5 or 6 people, and that will be because of a marriage or some unavoidable reason. So it's really, actually, people love to stay here. In fact, I often joke, can I transfer you to Chennai? And they'll say there'll be punishment. People will joke here that don't punish us, please. I'm happy here. Don't screw my happiness by transferring me to Chennai. Because, people go there and see the traffic and they see, man, I've escaped all that. I'm so happy here. So it is really true that people are happier. Objectively, I have observed it. So, and increasingly, in fact, I live here. Oh, I can tell you this, that I actually miss almost nothing about a big city today. And we even have, small get-togethers, some nice things here around. And once you have a little bit of money you can inject into it, you can have the nice things here. I mean, it's actually not difficult at all. So that is why I think there is, and the level of infrastructure has come up to a level where even this remote village, which actually the roads used to be shoddier, maybe I remember 5-6 years ago, the roads have really become good now. So it is definitely true that things are getting better in this. Yeah, I'm projecting Ravi Kumar's now.
Okay.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah. It's obvious that you don't see many hurdles. Why are not many companies doing this? So, and that's a really good one. A lot of these, see, we are slaves of mental habit. Okay, that's how I'll put it. Well, I'll give you an example. Most of us would not think beyond sending our children to college, for example. And yet, repeatedly now we are finding that, particularly, many of these liberal arts majors are now close to worthless. In the US, it's already true now. The psychology and English and sociology majors and their incomes, they are finding that if they went to college to get those majors, they have very poor job prospects or very low incomes, all of that. That's already true in the US. And yet still most people go because, again, mental habit or slaves of mental habit or a fear of missing out on something. The fear of missing out is a big factor in this. One of the things that I remove myself personally from those fears of missing out by simply trying to gain my mental independence first. Think different, as Steve Jobs put it. And once you create that mental habit, it's who you are talking to, who your influence circle is, all of that, then you are able to actually do these things. So it's not actually as much a physical hurdle or a technology hurdle, any of these, it's a mental hurdle. That's the bigger one. So I would say that is what an entrepreneur has to overcome first, that think different.
Gokul Dixit is the next one. Gokul's is the next one. Data localization laws.
Yeah, I see it. I'll bring it up. Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely do support data localization laws. Every country is doing it. Okay, every country is doing it. So it's not a question of should India do it, because it's practically every country is doing it. We actually face this pressure in Zoho, in jurisdiction after jurisdiction. I'll give you an example. We have planned a UAE data center, but Saudi Arabia has told us that that's not enough. You also need a Saudi data center to do business long term in Saudi Arabia. And we have actually a Netherlands data center, which is the neighbor of Germany in the EU. Both are very strong in EU. And the Germans often tell us, we also need a data center in Germany itself. And it's good that you have it in Netherlands, but we would also want to have it in Germany. So that level countries are going, and this is both Netherlands and Germany are very strong part of EU. So this is happening. And so now your second, that question, India, does India need to be protectionist about data? This protectionism is a word that is, that could set off flags. I'm just going to say it's data sovereignty. That's a better way to put it, rather than data protectionist. Data sovereignty. That India wants to have its own data, and that's data is a new oil, new whatever. So we want to have our own data. It's very understandable. So I think these laws are coming anyway around the world, and we have to adjust to them. As a company Zoho, we are definitely, our plan is to set up maybe 150 data centers corresponding to every country in the world in the next 10 years. And now Raj Subramaniam, I've posted that question. What are your views on India's current startup ecosystem? How do we get deep tech startups to be successful? I have mentored a couple of deep tech startups. I am glad to say that they've been actually doing quite well. What I told them is really focus on building some critical know-how. Be very pragmatic about where that finds a market. So let me give you an example. We have built these audio video tools, which is very core R&D to get audio and video work in a variety of systems. But this product itself, for example, you may see that it's a training product. Actually, we are repurposing for this purpose right now, but it's actually sold as a training product. It's addressing a training market, globally a training market. And so we take the core audio video technology, which we have done a lot of R&D on, and we address immediate tactical business opportunities in training market or digital classrooms or whatnot, as opposed to, for example, a corporate group meeting market. That's a separate market. So that is how we go to market with those. So that is my advice to deep tech startups. You have a mission of building core technology. You are pragmatic about how you're converting into products that can tactically address market needs. Both are important. In other words, a lot of times we have engineers who actually have deep thoughts or deep engineering expertise, but they almost are oblivious to market needs. What will customer pay for? I like to combine the two, that I'm an engineer, but I also want to understand what the customers need, and we are able to flexibly transform our technology into what the customer needs. So both parts are critical. So now we can go through.
There is one question, offline request from Guru. He's not able to type in the question, so he sent me a WhatsApp of it. Mr. Sridhar Vanakkam, it was good listening to your view of the order today. I work in higher education, keen and curious to reimagine the current models. Can there be a retreat or session to reimagine? Shankar Vanavar.
Yeah, definitely. I'm happy to host it. If there is something possible, I would like to. And we have actually education experts in the company, because we run the Zoho University now. We have rebranded as Zoho Schools of Learning, and we have really people who think deep about what works to impart the skills, the advanced skills, all of that. So we definitely want to reimagine this.
Was a feedback that the questions, I think people are not able to see your questions, so let me read it out so you can then answer. Yeah. Okay. This is from Krishnamurthy Mahalingam. Is it possible for a company starting up today to start in a place like Tenkasi? They might not have the time to build a talent pool.
Yeah. This is actually, I want you to think a little different here. What is time? Because In fact, I'll give you my perspective. You can look at all my gray hair. We started this company in 1996. And there was a dot-com bubble on soon after we started. Companies like Amazon, eBay, Yahoo, Google. Google, actually, we predate by 2 years. So in a sense, we already lost to all of them. We lost to Google, we lost to Amazon, we lost to Yahoo, all of that. But we are still going strong today. So this time that don't have the time to build a talent pool, it depends on your conception of time. What are you in for? Were we in a race against Google that we lost? If I think that way, I've already lost and gone from business. On the other hand, I'm in a process of life that is a continuing, life to live. So I've not lost anything. I mean, the time is a personal concept here rather than relative to Google or somebody. So if you rethink your question, then you will not think that way. So you think of then, and I told you that you start at year -5, then you will not actually worry about time. So I hope that answers the question.
The next one is from Jawahar Vadivelu. Will be the near-term and longer-term consequence of the imminent rise in unemployment in the US and the rest of the developed world on jobs and that are focused on.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. There is actually as a planning matter, I would increasingly not focus on the outsourcing type of jobs from the US in particular, but also many other countries, because structurally, politically, all the winds are blowing against these models. So I would actually not plan on it. I mean, it may be that they continue, but I know at least that's not the way I would bet. So there are definitely consequences to that rising unemployment in the developed world, and that definitely has an impact directly in the services sector. I'm sure that is the premise of this question. And we don't have to think very negatively about this, because we are thinking, oh, we are going to lose those jobs. I would say we are saying, in fact, I joke, why don't we as a company why do we think only about the solving problems in Chicago or Atlanta? Why don't we solve a problem in Kanpur and Lucknow and in Coimbatore, right? So it's very important for us to be solving our own problems too, not just American problems. So that is very important to think that way. Then it won't be a problem. But definitely you are right that I actually anticipate that there could be political, for example, travel restrictions, visa restrictions, all that could become much, much worse. I don't believe that we are going to go back to this pre-corona world anytime soon. And this puts a lot of pressure on these whole services jobs focused on serving those countries. At the very least, that's the way to plan ahead.
Next one is from Ravi Kumar. Question on COVID, Sridhar. If you look at the predictions about 2020, COVID was around in China in December 2019. Not many predicted and forecast what is happening today. Why did we get this so wrong? What's your view on it?
It's a really good question. I watched this. It's very fascinating. Our own company, we actually have been taking this very seriously. The moment I saw what was happening in Wuhan and in China, I knew that it's only a matter of time this will arrive in India and US and other countries. And I also knew that the systems are not set up even in the US, as they are demonstrating right now, to actually take the actions needed to contain. And this is something that I'll say this. China, there is a reason they reacted that strongly. And a lot of the world missed why. And I'm very glad that our Prime Minister Modi really got the appropriate sense of alarm about this at the appropriate time. And this lockdown is absolutely necessary. I fully support our government on this, because the Chinese, whatever you think about their political system, all of that, they saw something and they reacted very, very strongly to it. What was it? In fact, I'm fortunate to have Dr. Balachandar, who is actually our who works with us in Zoho to provide. In fact, we have some medical initiatives going on, and he actually was a leading cardiologist in the US, and he came back to India about 7 years ago to set up his practice. And we have been partnering on some initiatives, and he has been advising me on this. He said, I have been alarmed, and he told me this in mid-January, early February itself, and this looks like a long time ago. He said, normally doctors don't fall down, sick and die. And this is happening so extensively in China. That is what is really, really interesting about this. That is not normal. That does not happen. It's not just the flu. It's not just this, because doctors, the medical professionals dying in these numbers is not normal. So we have to react with alarm to this. And that is what also woke me up, that this is something serious going on. So, and this, unfortunately, so much of the world, there is a kind of what I call a bias towards normalcy, bias towards not interrupting what we perceive as normal lives. And it's natural. I mean, it's very natural to have this bias. And so people refuse to see this, even though China was locked down, all of this, somehow all of us assumed, even in India to some extent, that will never happen here. And of course, the US assumed it. They still are fighting the aftermath of that denial. So, and that is why the world got it so wrong. At least in India, I think we seem to have averted a major disaster. I hope that Indians, all of us, cooperate on this.
There's one last question that I see from, just give me a minute. With the current new norm of remote work education, do you see Zoho has a role to play?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually have this Zoho remotely. We launched, we had all the tools already. We packaged it as a new suite. And a lot of our engineering focus, my own focus in terms of product management, a lot of it is going to remotely right now to make remote work as easy as possible, as seamless as possible. We can already see that this meeting was possible. We could do this, and these tools will get better, only better. A lot of ways in which we can capture particular emotion of the audience. I can get a real-time feedback of how you are thinking, feeling, maybe some AI where it's observing your feelings and transmitting a gist of it rather than your actual image. Because as a speaker, I want to know a gist of the audience, not every single face. A lot of that are coming. There is possible to do this with AI. And so remote work is going to get better and better, for sure. And in our country's context, this also is critical for our spreading the jobs to rural areas. And I actually have one more thing that I want to add in this. I didn't mention in my main presentation. I would say the economies of scale needed to achieve good unit costs have actually been falling in many industries, most industries. Let me elaborate. What I mean by that is, let's say take some widget X. Let's say that previously 1 million widgets you need to make in a factory in order to achieve the lowest possible cost per widget. Today, the same widget, even a 50,000 unit, 100,000 unit, 1/10 of the unit volume, you can still achieve those same costs. In other words, the economies of scale at which you achieve those low unit cost have come down, right? So instead of 1 million units, you can come at achieve that at 50,000 units. This has tremendous interest. This has tremendous implication for these rural initiatives I mentioned. We can actually get around to doing smaller lot production and still at a very cost-effective way. That is something that I'm exploring as well in Zoho, these ideas.
One request from Sumit Ganguly. I think he wants to ask you a question. Let me prove it.
Yeah.
Sumit?
First of all, congratulations. We're very proud of what you're doing for Chennai, for India. I think the belief system is extremely important. And I think you are clearly one of the leaders. And I'm again a compatriot. Of course, right now I'm in Princeton, but I'm very much from Chennai with Gabs.
Oh, okay. Okay, wow.
And with Gabs, I think emulating what you're doing. The point that I wanted to ask is something that we are also perpetually fighting. Belief in our people that we can, from India, from Chennai, build an organization of the ilk of some of the Israeli companies or the US companies. How do you instill that? And how do you kind of build that culture, please? Thank you.
That's an excellent one. In fact, one of the insights, and I was in Princeton for 4.5, 5 years, and I remember thinking these exact thoughts as a graduate student at that time. So I'm happy to say 25 years later, now I have some insights to share about those exact problems. As I was roaming the streets of Princeton, I used to be thinking about this. How do we do this in India? How do we create all this? And the first thing that I would say, due to our own history, the colonial and of course the repeated invasions, repeated sense of loss, and people running away, being chased away, and all of these things has left us a psyche of, I'm going to call, a low self-esteem nation. Okay, that's really, if I will characterize India, I would say we are actually a remarkably low self-esteem nation. Even things we have done well. For example, our government has actually handled the virus situation better than most governments, more governments, but we will still beat upon ourselves. Of course, improvements are needed, but there is not, the press slant in all of this is consistently negative about ourselves. We just want to believe the worst about ourselves all the time. And that is the first thing that we have to fix. And I'll give you an honest thing here. We have been here 25 years, 30 years. We are considered a very highly corrupt country, right? Honestly, I've never actually felt that in my own experience. We have very, very few examples where somebody extorted us for a big bribe. Many cases, the officials have actually been more than helpful, and even the politicians. And sometimes, I'll tell you, there was one strange episode where I actually met a politician once, and this guy had a reputation for some corruption, and he told me, I admire companies like you. You are doing a good thing. And I tell you, I'll leave you alone because I actually don't want to interfere with companies like you. This is what he told me, actually. Really, honestly, he told me this, that I don't want to interfere with companies like you because you are trying to do a good thing. And this is actually our country, that even somebody with a reputation for corruption has some kind of a dharma in them, the dharma of corruption. So we can give ourselves some credit. And at the same time, I've seen, whether it's China or Taiwan, South Korea, all of them have corruption. In fact, in many cases, China worse than us, much worse than us. And there is, hardly any recourse. Here we are, free to speak our mind on Twitter and everywhere. And they don't have that. And they have a lot of the corruption. But we actually somehow think that we are inferior. We cannot do this. I sincerely believe we can do a lot of these things. And I'm happy to say that I've done those experiments that I used to think thought experiments in Princeton. They're real world experiments now. We can actually do those now.
Thank you very much.
Okay. And there's one more question, Sudhakar.
Yes. He's from our team. So do you think Italy is an eye-opener for us?
Absolutely. Italy is, I actually still have a slight fear. I will say that fear has not gone away completely, even though the government's actions have given me a lot more confidence. But we don't want to become Italy because it's, the kind of civilizational nightmare, the amount of thing we go through and what they are going through now. And this is happening in New York, it's happening in San Francisco, it's happening in LA, a lot of Seattle, a lot of cities now. So we don't want to get this out of control. So, and it is a massive eye opener. And it also, we actually can see that there's no magic in all these countries which have much better development milestones, still didn't get this right. And our country we always beat upon ourselves. We actually got a lot of things right here. So I'm actually proud of what our governments have done, central, state, at the district level, everywhere, actually. In fact, in this village, policemen showed up and told they went around the streets and announced that don't come out of the house, please stay. And they even begged, they said, we beg you to stay in your homes. That's what the policemen actually did here. I saw this and I was very proud of what they were doing. Can these talks be archived? Yes. Vanita, you're recording these, right?
Yes, I am. And it will be made. In fact, there was a question from Sharan also, if it will be available. We are recording it, and we will also be posting the talk on YouTube. And Zoho also allows for recording. Yeah. I think we are done with the questions. I don't see any more. Let's just give it a minute in case somebody wants to ask further questions, or then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, one more question, if I'm allowed that, Sumit again.
Yeah, please.
What is your personal aspiration?
Personal aspiration?
In life, yeah.
Yeah, you are, I'm 51 now, so I think maybe this question would have been more appropriate when I was 25. But honestly, I enjoy what I've been doing all along. So that's why there is no burnout, there's no sense of even tiredness, any of this. Because if you love what you're doing, and you can keep doing this. So I actually hope to go on as long as the universe will let me. So, and what I want to do is one district level, this Tenkasi district now. I want to actually hope to be able to make an impact. That's something that we have built here that is world class, that actually serves as a model for all of other districts, other India. And I want 1,000 companies like this to emerge across India. And I hope to be able to influence this process. That is my personal aspiration.
I see.
May I ask you, what are you doing in Princeton? What is your major? Because you said Princeton, so because I went to Princeton, so I have to ask you that.
First of all, the video transmission is actually very good. We can kind of see you very clearly. So again, great product. So I'm with a company called Gabs Technologies, and which is out of Chennai and of course in the US. So I'm the CEO and I'm based out of Princeton, New Jersey, and I've been in the US for 30 years, but every couple of months I'm in Chennai. So that's the background. Yeah.
So yeah. So you want to add something, Gopal?
No, nothing at all. I'm actually in the middle of an IC meeting doing some investment decisions, so I just get back to that.
Okay. All right. Good luck. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Sridhar. Thank you so much.